noticed that everything lately feels like a rerun? Barbie is back and more glamorous than ever, Y2K fashion has returned with rhinestones and low-rise jeans, and even Mean Girls is gracing the big screen again. Yes, again. From Frasier to that 70s show, it seems like pop culture is stuck in a never-ending reboot cycle. But this isn't just a lack of originality, it's something deeper. We're living in a moment where nostalgia isn't just a warm, fuzzy feeling, it's a luxury, a commodity, something that's packaged, polished, and sold back to us through Instagram filters, pastel branding, and emotionally charged marketing campaigns. And the wild part? We're buying it gladly. But why? Why are we so obsessed with revisiting the past? Is it comfort, escapism, or something more strategic? In today's video, unpacking the rise of nostalgia as a form of emotional luxury, an indulgence that reveals just as much about our collective anxiety as it does about our longing for a simpler time, from post-World War I escapism in the 1920s to the 1950s revival that dominated 1970s pop culture, to the 90s throwback boom in the 2010s. Every generation has reached backwards in times of chaos. So is today's nostalgia cycle just the latest iteration? Or has it become something new entirely? We'll explore the psychology, media cycles, and consumer behavior that has turned the past into a premium product. Because when the future feels uncertain, nothing feels more luxurious than yesterday. Chapter 1. Nostalgia as a luxury commodity. When we think of luxury, we usually picture the obvious: designer handbags with four-figure price tags, exclusive vacation spots, 5-star tasting menus, or first-class tickets to a Beyoncé concert. But in today's culture, luxury has shape-shifted into something far more subtle and arguably more seductive. Luxury isn't always about material wealth anymore. In many ways, it's about emotional exclusivity. It's about access to a feeling, a vibe, a memory that feels personal. And that's where nostalgia comes in. Today, nostalgia has become a premium product sold to us by some of the most powerful brands on the planet. Companies like Disney, Mattel, Nickelodeon, and even McDonald's have figured out that the most effective way to sell you something new is to remind you of something old. But not just any old thing, your childhood, your Saturday morning cartoon rituals, the lip gloss you wore in 8th grade, the cereal box toys you fought your siblings for. It's a hyper-specific, emotionally potent form of marketing that taps into your past and rewraps it in a glossy, curated aesthetics. Take the Barbie movie as a most striking example. Sure, it was pink, sparkly, and irreverent, but it was so deeply strategic. It tapped into multi-generational nostalgia that appealed to everyone, from Gen Z TikTokers to millennial moms. But the movie didn't just sell Barbies, it sold an emotion, a memory, a time when the world felt less chaotic and more manageable. Barbie core wasn't just an aesthetic, it was a portal to comfort, with a feminist twist and a wink of irony. It's no coincidence that this return to Barbie happened in a post-lockdown, politically volatile era when audiences were craving familiarity, escapism, and a sense of identity in an uncertain world. This is why nostalgia is starting to resemble luxury. Luxury in many ways is defined by exclusivity. And nostalgia feels exclusive because it's deeply personal. No one else remembers your exact version of the 2000s. Your experience of Lizzie McGuire, butterfly clips, or the scent of Gap's Dream body spray is entirely yours. When you re-experience these things, even in filtered, updated forms, it feels indulgent, private, comforting, just like sipping Dom Perignon in a quiet corner booth. Nostalgia gives us an emotional high, rooted in familiarity. Nowhere is this more obvious than in the resurgence of Y2K fashion. Low-rise jeans, rhinestone bedazzling, halter tops, and platform sandals are back, not just because they're trendy, but because they act like an emotional time machine. They take us back to a pre-crisis era, before climate anxiety, social media burnout, before financial crash, or the pandemic. Gen Z didn't even live through the early 2000s in the same way millennials did, but they're still drawn to the aesthetic. But why? Because nostalgia isn't always about actual memory, it's about perceived simplicity, about aesthetics that signal joy, Chaos, fun, without the stress of actually living through it. Even our packaging has gone retro. Brands like Glossier, with their minimalist, almost medicinal fonts, evoke early 2000s drugstore beauty. Coca-Cola has re-released vintage-style bottles. Polaroid and Kodak are making major comebacks, not because film is more practical, but because it feels realer, more tactile, more romantic. These brands aren't just selling products, they're selling feelings. They're selling you a story about who you were, or who you think you were at a different time. And that story, once you attach a bit of design, polish, and strategic nostalgia, becomes highly profitable. This emotional economy isn't limited to fashion and film either. Even tech has jumped into the nostalgia train. Apple's recent iOS updates have included retro app icons and widgets that mimic the look of early iPods. Spotify Wrapped isn't just a marketing tool, it's a personalized time capsule. We crave these small curated reminders of the past because they anchor us in otherwise unstable presents. So here's the question worth asking. Is the past really better? Or does it just feel that way because we've stylized it? Have we turned memory into a boutique experience, filtered, edited, and sold back to us in a curated color palette and emotionally manipulative playlists? The truth is, nostalgia offers a kind of escapism that feels indulgent because it allows us to revisit the past in our own terms. But just like any luxury, there's a cost. And as we keep reaching backward for comfort, we risk blurring the lines between memory and marketing, authenticity and aesthetic. Chapter 2, Emotional Comfort in the Time of Chaos. Nostalgia doesn't just show up randomly, it's a pattern. Historically, it tends to rise when the present feels unbearable and the future uncertain. In these moments of a collective anxiety, nostalgia becomes a balm, a psychological form of self-soothing. We turn to the past not necessarily because it was better, but because it feels familiar, and familiarity feels safe when everything else feels in flux. After World War I, for example, the world was deep in mourning. Millions of lives were lost, economies were shattered, and societies were grappling with trauma and mechanized war for the first time. What followed wasn't an era of somber reflection. It was the Roaring Twenties. It was jazz flappers, champagne towers, and the dazzling geometry of Art Deco. This was an era that dressed itself in fantasy. The cultural mood shifted sharply towards escapism, indulgence, and a glamorized vision of modernity that borrowed heavily from older notions of opulence. Think ancient Egypt, Greco-Roman revivalism, and Victorian decadence, all reimagined through the 20th century lens. The 1920s weren't just roaring because of excess, they were roaring because people wanted to forget. Similarly, in the 70s, America was reeling from the Vietnam War, the Watergate scandal, and a recession that shattered post-war economic optimism. And what did pop culture cling to? The 1950s. Suddenly, diners with jukeboxes and chrome countertops were back in style. Happy Days premiered in 1974 and quickly became a massive hit, portraying a version of the 50s that was squeaky clean and impossibly wholesome. Grease, released in 1978, took this even further. Nostalgia was no longer a passive feeling. It was a full-blown aesthetic movement. It wasn't about accuracy, it was about comfort, about constructing a myth of simpler times, even if those times were anything but simple for many Americans. This same pattern repeated itself after the 2008 financial crisis. The late 2000s and early 2010s saw a cultural pivot towards the 1990s. Millennials whose childhoods were shaped by the 90s cartoons, grunge fashion, and pre-digital innocence began reaching for those memories just as their adulthoods were being rocked by job insecurity, student debt, and increasingly fragmented world. Suddenly, chokers, Lisa Frank notebooks, Tamagotchis, and Friends reruns were back in vogue. The rise of platforms like Tumblr and Instagram helped aestheticize this nostalgia, turning it into a curated, shareable lifestyle. Entire fashion lines were based on 90s silhouettes. Urban Outfitters sold vintage VHS tapes and Nintendo 64s as they were luxury collectibles. It wasn't just sentiment, it was strategy. What we see in all of these moments is a cultural reflex. When the present feels unlivable, the past becomes a refuge. This isn't just about media cycles or fashion trends, it's deeply psychological. According to studies of consumer behavior, nostalgia can reduce feelings of loneliness, increase self-esteem, and even enhance the perception of social connectiveness. When the world outside feels fragmented, turning inward to memories of childhood or earlier decades gives us a sense of coherence and identity. And here we are again in today's post-pandemic world, We're grappling with political polarization, the cost of living crisis, AI disruption, and a kind of existential fatigue that feels hard to name but easy to feel. We're collectively burnt out. And what are we doing? We're diving headfirst into the past. Streaming services are filled with reboots and revivals. TikTok is a parade of rich retro aesthetics, coquette core, 2014 Tumblr core, and even mob wife winter. Gen Z is embracing early 2000 digital cameras for the grainy real-life aesthetic. Millennials are deep in the archive of their own youth, revisiting Avril Lavigne and reviving indie sleaze. It's important to understand that this isn't just a flaw in culture, it's a symptom. Nostalgia in chaotic times functions like a soft blanket, offering psychological warmth. It tells us that there was a time when things made sense, when we felt more in control, more innocent, more hopeful. Whether that's true or not doesn't really matter. What matters is that we believe it. But there's a tension here. While nostalgia can offer momentary relief, it can also blur our ability to fully engage with the present. If we're always looking backwards to escape forward momentum, what happened to cultural innovation? Are we remembering or are we retreating? So that brings us to the real question. Are we addicted to the past or are we trying to survive the present? And more provocatively, how much of this nostalgia is genuine comfort and how much of it is curated escapism, sold back to us in a pixel-perfect packaging? I mean, I'm all about nostalgia, to be honest. I feel like it is an escape for me, especially like how chaotic and horrible things are right now, at least in Canada. I just like to go back pre-2015 to a time where the country was like a livable place. So I mean, I'm all about nostalgia. I just like to think about, well, why? Like, what is it? Chapter 3, History Repeats Itself, So Does Culture. If you ever notice that what's trendy now often feels eerily familiar, you're not imagining it. Culture runs in loops. The clothes we wear, the shows we binge, even the fonts we fall in love with. Much of it is borrowed from the past, repackaged for a new audience. This repetition isn't just a coincidence. It's a phenomenon widely known in pop culture theory as the 20-year rule. The basic idea is that trends cycle back into popularity about 2 decades after their initial heyday. And this isn't because society is creatively bankrupt, it's because of generational influence. And here's how it works. People who grew up in a particular era often hit their cultural and economic stride 20 to 30 years later. That's when they become the tastemakers, the directors, designers, brand managers, and content creators. So millennials who came of age in the early 2000s are now the ones greenlighting projects, designing fashion lines, and shaping marketing strategies. Naturally, they turn to the most emotionally resonant when they had their own youth, and so Y2K makes a comeback, not just in fashion, but in music videos, makeup trends, and even the resurrection of old websites like Neopets and MySpace-style aesthetics. Take Stranger Things, for example. While the show technically takes place in the 1980s, it doesn't just replicate the decade, it reverses it. The creators, the Duffer Brothers, were born in the mid-1980s themselves. Their version of the 80s is drenched in cinematic homage. Spielberg-style family dynamics, John Carpenter-style horror, Stephen King-level small-town weirdness. The synth-heavy soundtrack, vintage bikes, and analog technology all combine to create a world that feels almost more 1980s than the actual 80s. It's not just period styling, it's a curated tribute designed to evoke nostalgia, even in viewers who weren't alive at the time. That's the magic of cultural nostalgia. It doesn't require direct memory to be effective. It operates like a shared myth, passed down through media. We saw the same impulse behind the Mean Girls reboot. Instead of positioning the film a fresh take or radical re-imaging, the marketing leaned into nostalgia. Pink everything, direct quotes from the original, and even a Wednesday release because on Wednesdays we wear pink. The film wasn't interested in breaking new ground so much as recreating a vibe, hoping the audiences would feel the same giddy emotional pull they did in 2004. It's not so much a new film as it is a memorial service for a cultural moment hosted by the very generation that first idolized it. Fashion too is deeply tied to the cycle. We've recently witnessed a full-blown Y2K revival. Think metallic miniskirts, cargo pants, butterfly tops, and baby tees. The aesthetic once mocked as tacky or cringy are now considered cool again, precisely because they've had time to age into nostalgia. Fashion's cyclical nature is especially susceptible to this trend, often because it depends heavily on emotional memory. We don't just wear clothes, we wear feelings, eras, and identities. And we don't stop there. The 2010s are already making a comeback in subtle ways. Tumblr era fashion, think American Apparel tennis skirts, indie sleeves, dip-dyed hair, and thick eyebrows are bubbling up again, especially among Gen Z creators, who were tweens or teens when the aesthetic peaked. Even grunge, once revived in the 1990s as a rebellion against the 80s glitz, has begun yet another rotation through the cycle. Cultural recycling is practically built into the way we process memory and aesthetics. Of course, all of this repetition has sparked criticism. Some people see it as laziness or lack of innovation. Why make something new when you can just revive something that already worked? But it's not quite that simple. These revivals often serve as cultural commentary, adding layers of irony, nostalgia, and even political reinterpretation of the original material. Stranger Things isn't just a throwback, it's a reflection of childhood trauma. The Barbie movie wasn't just about the doll, it was about a conversation about gender roles and the commodification of femininity. So while the package may look familiar, the meaning evolves. Still, it's worth asking, if every generation reboots the one before it, where does that leave originality? Can anything truly be new anymore? Or are we destined to keep remixing the same cultural loops with slight variations? In an age of infinite access and algorithmic repetition, the line between homage and innovation is increasingly blurry. But maybe that's the point. Maybe culture isn't about constantly breaking away from the past, but about reinterpreting it, layering it with new meanings that speak to our current moment. After all, nostalgia doesn't have to be the enemy of progress. When used to be thoughtfully, it can become the canvas in which we paint our most current fears, desires, and identities. Chapter 4. Media Reboots and the Myth of the Golden Age. Scroll through any streaming platform today, and you're likely to feel a strange sense of déjà vu. Titles that once defined specific cultural moments, Frasier, Gossip Girl, Sex and the City, Mean Girls, Full House, That 70s Show, have all been resurrected for a new generation. It's not that Hollywood has run out of ideas, it's that reboots are incredibly effective at tapping into something powerful. The myth of the Golden Age. This myth suggests that there was once a time, whether it's the 80s or 90s or early 2000s, when things were better. Not necessarily in objective terms, but emotionally. The past is idealized as pure, more authentic, and less complicated. In a world that feels increasingly fragmented, high stakes, and oversaturated, the Golden Age myth becomes a comforting narrative. It lets us believe that if we can just return to that moment via a reboot, a reunion special, or a remastered theme song, we can reclaim the certainty, simplicity, and optimism we once felt. But of course, the Golden Age was never as perfect as we remember. The sense of comfort it offers is rooted not in the truth, but in selective memory. The past is remembered not as it was, but as we emotionally needed it to be. It's a mirage, and yet an incredibly pervasive one. Take Barbie as a case in point. In the 2023 film, directed by Greta Gerwig, doesn't just bring back an iconic doll, it deconstructs her, invites viewers to re-experience their childhoods through a critical lens, exposing the contradictions baked into Barbie's legacy. On the surface, it's playful and pink and nostalgic, but underneath it's a layered cultural critique, addressing feminism, corporate branding, identity, and existential dread. The film is a masterclass in what we might call subversive nostalgia, using the aesthetic of the past to make a sense of the present. It's both satire and celebration, critique and comfort, and it's true, I do like that twist on Barbie. Reboots like Frasier and Just Like That, the Sex and the City sequel series, operate similar, but with a different emotional target. They weren't just continuations of beloved shows, they're emotional sequels to our own lives. They let us revisit characters who, like us, have aged, evolved, and adapted. Watching Carrie Bradshaw navigate dating in her 50s, or seeing Frasier Crane reflect on fatherhood doesn't just satisfy curiosity. It reconnects us with who we were when we first met them. And it is true, I am watching the Just Like That reboot. And I feel like if I watched the show without seeing the other Sex and the Cities, maybe I wouldn't be into it. But I feel like Carrie Bradshaw and other characters really go back to their old character. So it does give you that sense of warmth and nostalgia, being like, because you remember the time in your life when you were watching the original Sex and the City. Nostalgia here becomes less about the plot and more about the feeling of returning to a version of ourselves that felt more certain, more full of possibility. For women in particular, these reboots carry unique emotional weight. Historically, media has often sidelined women after a certain age, reducing them to supporting roles or erasing them entirely. But nostalgia content allows women, both characters and viewers, to reclaim their narratives. These stories let female icons age on screen with visibility and agency, showing that growth doesn't mean disappearance. We aren't starting over, we're picking up where we left off, with all the wisdom and scars that come with it. However, there's a shadow side to this revival trend. When media becomes overly fixated on looking backward, cultural innovation slows down. Reboots are safer bets for studios and platforms. They come with built-in fan bases, guaranteed clicks, and lower marketing risks. But this safety-first approach means that original stories often get sidelined in favor of nostalgic rehashes. It becomes harder for fresh voices to break through when the past is constantly being polished and replayed. And then there's a risk of stagnation. When we're always reaching for what was, we risk ignoring what could be. Nostalgia can become a cultural quicksand, trapping us in a loop where we revisit familiar archetypes instead of creating new ones. This doesn't just affect entertainment, it shapes our politics, our aesthetics, even our sense of identity. If we were always looking to reboot the good old days, are we also avoiding the hard work of confronting the present and imagining a more inclusive, daring future? Still, not all nostalgia is regressive. When handled with self-awareness and intention, it can be transformative. Reboots can provide continuity in a world of change. They can offer catharsis, critique, and cultural healing. But we have to be mindful. Are we engaging with nostalgia to understand where we came from or to escape where we are? So the big question becomes, is nostalgia enriching our culture or quietly holding it hostage? Can we tell new stories with old characters, or are we just looping through the same narratives because it's easier than confronting the unknown? Chapter 5. Can we move forward while staring back? Nostalgia is undeniably powerful, but it's also deeply selective. When we look back at a certain era, we tend to remember the fun parts, the music we love, the clothes we wore, the movies that shaped us. We remember how things made us feel, not necessarily how things really were. The messy parts, the awkward transitions, the cultural limitations of those times, they tend to fade into the background. Nostalgia has a way of softening the edges. That's part of why it's so appealing. It's not just about reliving the past, it's about reliving a version of the past that feels simpler, more joyful, and less complicated. That doesn't mean we're ignoring reality, it means we're filtering it through the lens of emotional memory. When life feels unpredictable, the sense of emotional certainty can feel like a luxury. In today's media, we see that nostalgia often comes with a modern twist. We're not just watching old stories get re-released, we're watching them get reimagined. The Barbie movie, for example, took a familiar icon and reintroduced her to a new audience with updated themes and a fresh perspective. It gave longtime fans something recognizable, while also allowing the story to evolve with the times. The Mean Girls reboot 2 leaned into the early 2000 roots while adjusting the tone for a new generation. These aren't carbon copies, they're reinterpretations, updated for modern sensibilities. But here's the thing, we're not necessarily addicted to the past itself. We're often drawn to the idea of the past, the parts we miss, the sense of security or optimism we once felt. And often the versions of those memories we keep are more polished than the real thing. It's not a bad thing, it's just human nature. We idealize what made us feel safe, understood, and hopeful. This doesn't mean we're stuck, though. In fact, some of the most creative ideas come from remixing old ones, borrowing the best of the past and putting a new spin on it. The past can be a tool, not a trap. It gives us material to work with, especially in times where originality can feel overwhelming or risky. Referencing past eras isn't a sign of laziness, sometimes it's continuity, about feeling connected to something larger than just here and now. But it's also worth asking, how do we keep moving forward if we're always looking back? Can we grow creatively and culturally if we keep drawing from the same well? Or are we simply refining the same ideas over and over again? In many ways, this current wave of nostalgia feels like escapism and more like a form of cultural grounding. We've lived through the global pandemic, major technological shifts, and economic uncertainty, all in the last few years. So it's no wonder people are reaching for stories, styles, and symbols that remind them of steadier times. It's a way of staying rooted when everything else feels like it's spinning. The challenge is balance. There's nothing wrong with looking back. After all, the past is where most of our favorite things come from. But nostalgia works best when it's paired with intention, when it inspires something new rather than just reliving something old. It's easy to press play on the same songs or stories when we're already in love. It's harder, but more rewarding to take that inspiration and create something that reflects where we are now. So maybe nostalgia isn't about getting stuck. Maybe it's about bridging the gap, connecting past and present in a way that feels more grounded and understood and creative. Maybe the real luxury isn't the past itself, but what we choose to do with it. And here's the question we should all be asking. Are we using nostalgia to enrich our future because we're afraid of what comes next? And maybe, just maybe, it's okay to answer a little bit of both. I mean, to be honest, the future is getting so scary. I am slightly scared to what comes next. So I can see the feeling of like looking back at something familiar. So why does everything feel like a reboot? Because the world is overwhelming, and nostalgia offers us an escape that's comforting and familiar and emotionally rich. It's not just a trend, it's a coping mechanism, a marketing tool, and a mirror to our cultural psyche. From the post-war escapism of the 1920s to the retro diners of the 70s, to Barbie and Stranger Things today, we've always looked backwards when we're unsure about what lies ahead. But nostalgia doesn't have to be a trap. When used thoughtfully, it can be a bridge, connecting the past and the present, memory and identity, innocence and insight. The key is to consume it with awareness. So next time you find yourself clicking on a reboot or craving a pair of jelly sandals, ask yourself, what am I really longing for? Is it the past, or is it the version of myself I used to be? Let me know in the comments below what nostalgia trends are you most drawn to right now. Do you think nostalgia is helping us heal, or is it keeping us stuck? And don't forget to like and subscribe. So let me know in the comments below your thoughts on nostalgia. I mean, I love nostalgia, so I'm always gonna, I think if it's done well, and I mean, there is nothing new under the sun. I just hate it when it's like obvious and not recreated with a twist. And if it's done well, nostalgia can be good, put it that way. So thanks for watching. Let me know in the comments below.